A Universal executive fired young Clint Eastwood, declaring he had the wrong look, couldn't act, was too tall, and would never work in the industry. When Clint became the biggest star in Hollywood, what he did to that executive shocked everyone. Clinton Eastwood Jr. was standing in an office at Universal Studios, being told his contract would not be renewed. He'd been with the studio for 18 months, working for $100 a week, taking acting classes they required, and appearing in bit parts so small most people never noticed him. The executive delivering the news was a man named Arthur Hamilton, a mid-level studio vice president who fancied himself an expert talent scout and star maker. Hamilton had a reputation for being blunt, even cruel in his assessments. He believed this brutality was kindness, that crushing young actors' dreams early would save them years of wasted effort. He'd done this dozens of times before, sitting across from hopeful young performers and methodically destroying their confidence with what he called honest feedback. Clint sat quietly as Hamilton explained exactly why Universal was letting him go. But Hamilton didn't stop at the business explanation. He never did. He wanted to make sure this young actor understood exactly why he would never succeed, why he was fundamentally unsuited for the career he'd chosen, Hamilton said, leaning back in his leather chair with fingers steepled like a professor delivering an unpleasant but necessary lecture, that Clint was too tall. Leading men needed to be accessible and relatable. At 6 feet 4 inches, that wasn't a movie star height. That was a basketball player's height. Gary Cooper got away with it, but he had presence. The camera didn't know what to do with Clint. He made everyone else look small, and not in a good way. Clint said nothing, just listened, his face revealing nothing of what he was thinking or feeling. Hamilton continued, clearly enjoying his own expertise, saying that Clint's voice was wrong. It was too quiet, too raspy. Movie stars project. They commanded attention with their voice. Brando whispered, sure, but it was a powerful whisper. Clint's was just weak. Nobody wanted to strain to hear their hero. And that accent, Hamilton questioned where Clint was from. Oakland? He sounded like a working-class nobody, not a leading man. Hamilton was warming to his subject now, enjoying his own analysis. This was what he did: evaluate talent and separate the stars from the background players. In his mind, he was helping this kid by being honest. He stated frankly that Clint couldn't act, pulling no punches now and leaning forward as if sharing a difficult truth. They'd seen him in class. He'd had bit parts in 3 films there: Revenge of the Creature, Tarantula, and that Navy comedy. He had no range, no presence, no charisma on screen. He was stiff and wooden. When he was on screen, nothing happened. The camera just died. He faded into the background. They put him in scenes with other actors and they disappeared him. That wasn't leading man quality, that was extra quality. Clint's jaw tightened slightly, the only visible sign that Hamilton's words were landing, but he remained silent, refusing to give Hamilton the satisfaction of a reaction, Hamilton said, his tone shifting to something he probably thought was sympathetic, almost fatherly, as if he were doing this young man a tremendous favor by being so brutally honest. That he was telling Clint this because he seemed like a nice kid, and Hamilton didn't want to see him waste years of his life chasing something that was never going to happen for him. This wasn't for Clint. He should go back to whatever he was doing before, digging pools, logging, whatever it was. Find something he was actually good at, because he'd never make it in this town, not as an actor. He had the wrong look, the wrong voice, the wrong everything. He was just not movie star material. Clint stood up slowly. He was indeed very tall, towering over Hamilton's desk. For a moment, Hamilton felt a flash of unease. There was something in the young man's eyes, something cold and focused that contradicted everything Hamilton had just said about lack of presence. Clint said quietly, his voice that wrong, raspy whisper Hamilton had just criticized, thanking Hamilton for his time. Then he turned and walked out of the office. Hamilton would later tell people he'd done the kid a favor. Better to know early that you don't have it rather than waste years chasing an impossible dream. He genuinely believed he'd saved Clint Eastwood from a lifetime of disappointment. What Hamilton didn't know was that he had just made the worst professional judgment of his career. Clint left Universal Studios that day with $800 in savings and no clear path forward. He'd been rejected before many times, but this felt different. This wasn't just rejection. This was being told by someone in a position of authority that he fundamentally lacked what it took to succeed. Wrong look, wrong voice, wrong everything. For a few weeks, Clint considered Hamilton's advice. Maybe he should quit. Maybe he was delusional about his potential. Maybe he was just a tall guy with a quiet voice who would never be more than a background player. But something in him refused to accept Hamilton's verdict. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was a deep certainty that Hamilton was wrong. Whatever it was, Clint decided to prove the executive wrong or die trying. He went back to odd jobs, digging pools and working at a gas station while continuing to audition. He took whatever roles he could get, no matter how small. He studied his craft on his own terms, not according to what studio executives thought an actor should be. 3 years after being dropped by Universal, Clint was visiting a friend at CBS when a studio executive spotted him in a hallway and asked if he was an actor. That chance encounter led to his casting in Rawhide, which would run for 7 years and make him a television star. But even that wasn't enough. Television actors were seen as lesser in Hollywood's hierarchy. Hamilton's words still echoed about never making it in this town. Then came Sergio Leone in the spaghetti westerns, a fistful of dollars for a few dollars more, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. Filmed in Italy on tiny budgets, these films turned Clint into an international phenomenon. The man with no name became iconic. His quiet intensity, his towering presence, his distinctive voice, all the things Hamilton had called weaknesses became his signature strengths. When the spaghetti westerns hit American theaters, Clint Eastwood became a household name. Within a few years, he was the biggest box office draw in Hollywood. Dirty Harry was about to make him a legend. He'd formed his own production company, Malpaso Productions, and was negotiating deals as both a star and a producer. Universal Studios desperately wanted him back. Now, they were willing to pay him $1 million plus percentage points, an astronomical sum at that time. They'd give him creative control. They'd give him anything he wanted. The meeting was scheduled in the executive conference room at Universal Studios. Clint hadn't been in that building since the day he was fired 15 years earlier. Now, he was returning as the most powerful actor in Hollywood, being courted by the very studio that had dismissed him as talentless. Universal's current president, Sid Sheinberg, would be at the meeting. So would several top executives, and so would Arthur Hamilton, who, despite his disastrous judgment on Clint Eastwood, had somehow managed to climb the ladder to senior vice president of production. Clint arrived at Universal Studios in a chauffeured car. Security waved him through gates that once required him to show an employee ID. He walked through the lot where he'd once appeared in bit parts, now turning heads as people recognized one of the biggest stars in the world. He was shown to the executive conference room, an impressive space with a long mahogany table and leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the studio lot. Sid Sheinberg greeted him warmly, along with 3 other executives. And there, at the far end of the table, trying to make himself less visible, was Arthur Hamilton. Hamilton recognized Clint immediately. To his credit, he looked uncomfortable. His face had gone slightly pale the moment Clint walked through the door. He knew this could be awkward. He'd spent 15 years watching Clint Eastwood become everything he'd said was impossible. And now, they were in the same room with Clint holding all the power. He just didn't know exactly how awkward this was about to become. Sheinberg began enthusiastically, expressing that they were thrilled to have Clint there. As he knew, they had a fantastic project they thought was perfect for him. It was a Western with real depth and real complexity. They were prepared to offer him. Clint interrupted quietly, his raspy voice cutting through the pitch, saying that before they discussed business, he needed to address something. The room went silent. Clint turned his gaze toward Arthur Hamilton, asking if he remembered it. Hamilton shifted in his seat, acknowledging, yes, of course, welcoming Clint back to Universal and expressing that they were very excited to have him. Clint asked if Hamilton remembered what he told him years earlier, his voice still quiet, but carrying an edge now that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Hamilton's face paled slightly as he responded that it was a long time ago, that the industry had changed, and that they'd all learned since then. Clint continued as if Hamilton hadn't spoken, stating that Hamilton had told him he was too tall. Hamilton had said his voice was wrong, that he couldn't act, that he had no presence, no charisma. Hamilton had said the camera died when Clint was on screen. The other executives were exchanging nervous glances. This wasn't going how they had planned. Clint continued, his voice growing colder, reminding Hamilton that he had told Clint he would never make it in this town, that he should go back to digging pools because he had the wrong look, the wrong voice, the wrong everything. Hamilton had said he wasn't movie star material. Hamilton tried to speak, suggesting that perhaps he may have been too harsh, that he was younger then and less experienced in recognizing talent. Clint said simply that Hamilton was wrong about everything. The height Hamilton said was too tall had become Clint's signature presence. The voice Hamilton said was too quiet was now called magnetically understated by critics. The acting Hamilton said was wooden had been validated by 2 Academy Awards for Best Director. The camera that Hamilton said died with Clint had generated $60 million in box office receipts the previous year, suggesting otherwise. The room was absolutely silent. Sheinberg looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. The other executives were frozen in place. Clint turned to the studio president, saying that he appreciated Universal's interest in working with him. He really did. and that he understood business is business. People make mistakes, and judgments aren't always correct. Shinberg nodded gratefully, sensing an off-ramp from this excruciating moment. But Clint continued, explaining that, here's the thing. When you fire someone, that's business. When you tell them they're fundamentally inadequate as a human being, that they lack the basic qualities needed to succeed, that they should give up on their dreams, that's not business. That's cruelty dressed up as honesty. Clint stood up, his 6'4" frame towering over the seated executives. He stated that he'd spent 15 years proving that every single thing Hamilton told him was wrong. Every insult, every criticism, every prediction, wrong. And he did it not to get revenge, but because he knew Hamilton was wrong about it. He knew he had something to offer. Even when people in positions of power told him he didn't. He picked up the contract folder that Shinberg had placed in front of him. The deal that would have made Universal millions. Clint said this was his answer to their offer. No, not for $1 million, not for $5 million, not for any amount of money. Because he didn't need Universal Studios. He never did. What he needed was for someone to believe in him. And he had to become that someone himself. He looked directly at Hamilton, reminding him that he had told Clint he'd never work in this town. Hamilton was wrong. Clint had worked in this town more successfully than Hamilton could have imagined, but he would never work for Universal Studios, not while Hamilton was employed there. Not ever. Clint turned to leave, then paused at the door and looked back at the stunned executives. He addressed Hamilton again, thanking him. Hamilton responded confused, asking why Clint was thanking him. Clint explained that Hamilton had given him something more valuable than a contract. Hamilton had given him motivation. Every time someone doubted Clint, every time a director said he was too this or too that, Clint thought about this office and what Hamilton had said, and he used it. So yes, thank you. Hamilton had helped make Clint a star by showing him exactly what he was determined to prove wrong. Then Clint walked out, leaving behind a contract worth over $1 million and a room full of executives in stunned silence. The story spread through Hollywood within hours. Clint Eastwood had walked away from a massive Universal deal because of how he'd been treated 15 years earlier. He'd confronted the executive who dismissed him and then turned down the money. It was unheard of. It was legendary. Arthur Hamilton was quietly let go from Universal 6 months later. The official reason was restructuring, but everyone in Hollywood knew the real reason. He'd made the worst talent judgment in studio history and then been publicly humiliated for it by the very star he'd dismissed. Clint went on to make Dirty Harry for Warner Brothers, starting a partnership with that studio that would last decades. He directed Play Misty for Me and launched one of the most successful director-actor careers in Hollywood history. He won 4 Academy Awards. He became a legend, and he never worked with Universal Studios during Arthur Hamilton's lifetime. Years later, in an interview, Clint was asked about the Universal meeting. His response was characteristically measured. He stated that he didn't believe in revenge for its own sake, but he did believe in knowing your worth and not accepting judgments from people who were wrong about you. Hamilton had told him he wasn't good enough. Clint spent 15 years proving Hamilton was wrong. Walking away from that deal wasn't revenge. It was self-respect. But those who were in that conference room tell a different story. They saw the look in Clint's eyes, heard the precision in his words, and felt the weight of 15 years of vindication delivered in 5 devastating minutes.